Get out of my bank, before the stench of your poverty permanently stains my Italian marble floors." The branch manager practically spit those words into the face of a quiet black man, wearing a faded gray t-shirt. He snapped his fingers, signaling two massive security guards to grab the man by the shoulders. The wealthy clients in the lobby gasped, clutching their designer bags, watching the spectacle with disgusted amusement. But let us pause right here. For a second. You are probably wondering how a guy in a $5 t-shirt ended up getting thrown out of the most exclusive private wealth bank in Manhattan. To understand this absolute disaster of a morning, we need to rewind the clock by exactly 2 hours. It was a typical, brisk Tuesday morning in New York City. Marcus Washington woke up in his modest, 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. He did not live in a penthouse. He did not drive a leased Lamborghini to impress strangers on the internet. Marcus was a builder. A quiet genius, who spent the last 10 years writing code in his bedroom. He had just sold his cybersecurity startup to a major tech conglomerate, for an undisclosed sum that had 9 zeros in it. But looking at him, you would never guess he could buy the entire city block. He wore his lucky gray t-shirt, a pair of worn-out denim jeans, and some comfortable running shoes. To Marcus, true wealth was not about wearing loud luxury brands. It was about having the ultimate freedom to just be yourself, without caring about society's shallow expectation. He grabbed his backpack, shoved a very important piece of paper into his front pocket, and took the subway to the financial district. His destination was Vanguard Heritage Trust, a private bank that catered exclusively to the ultra-wealthy. You know the type of place. There are no ATMs outside. There are no friendly tellers offering lollipops to kids. The exterior is heavy granite, and the interior looks like a museum dedicated to old money. When Marcus pushed through the heavy revolving doors, the atmosphere inside shifted immediately. The air conditioning was freezing cold, smelling faintly of expensive cedar and arrogance. The lobby was completely silent, except for the soft classical music playing from hidden speakers. The moment his rubber sneakers squeaked on the pristine white marble floor, every head turned. A woman wearing a diamond necklace worth more than a house paused her conversation, just to glare at him. A man in a custom-tailored suit adjusted his silk tie, and scoffed audibly. Marcus ignored them, completely unbothered by the heavy judgment hanging in the air. He walked straight toward the front desk. The receptionist was a young woman with perfectly styled hair, and a smile that looked like it was made of plastic. As Marcus approached, her fake smile instantly vanished. She looked him up and down, her eyes lingering on the frayed edges of his t-shirt. "Can I help you find the exit, sir?" she asked, her voice dripping with artificial politeness. "I assume you are lost, because the public transit station is 2 blocks down the street." Marcus offered a polite, warm smile in return. "Actually, I am here to open a new corporate trust account and deposit this check." He reached into his pocket. The receptionist actually rolled her eyes, letting out a sharp sigh of profound annoyance. "Sir, this is Vanguard Heritage Trust. We do not handle standard checking accounts for the general public. Our minimum balance requirement is $50 million. I highly suggest you try the commercial bank around the corner. They might be able to cash your little paycheck." She did not even look at the folded piece of paper in his hand. She had already made up her mind, based entirely on his skin color and his unbranded clothing. This is what psychologists call unconscious bias. But in this room, it was just blatant, unfiltered elitism. Marcus did not raise his voice. He calmly placed the folded cashier's check on the polished mahogany counter. "I understand your policy perfectly. I still need to speak with a senior wealth manager, please." The receptionist glared at the check like it was a piece of trash. She pressed a button under her desk. Less than 30 seconds later, the heavy oak doors at the back of the lobby swung open. Out walked Richard Sterling, the managing director of the branch. Richard was the textbook definition of Wall Street arrogance. His suit cost $5,000, his hair was slicked back, and his posture screamed superiority. He marched over to the front desk, flanked by 2 bulky security guards. "Is there a problem here, Sarah?" Richard asked. not even acknowledging Marcus's presence. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. This individual is refusing to leave the premises. I already explained that we are a private institution. But he keeps insisting on opening an account." Richard finally turned his gaze toward Marcus. His eyes were cold, scanning the faded fabric of Marcus's shirt with absolute disgust. "Listen to me very carefully, buddy," Richard sneered, stepping aggressively close to Marcus. "I do not know what kind of scam you are trying to pull today. Maybe you found a fake check on the street. Or maybe you are just looking for a warm place to stand. But you have exactly 5 seconds to turn around and walk out those doors, before I have you arrested for trespassing." Marcus did not flinch. He looked Richard dead in the eye, his voice smooth and dangerously calm. "You haven't even looked at the check yet, Richard. By refusing service without verification, you are putting your branch in direct violation of federal banking regulations. I strongly advise you to do your job." Richard's face turned red with explosive rage. How dare this nobody quote regulations at him in his own bank? He snatched the folded check off the counter. He aggressively ripped it open, intending to laugh at whatever miserable amount was written on it. But as his eyes scanned the numbers, his arrogant smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. The check was issued by the Federal Reserve Bank. It was made out to Marcus Washington. The amount was $1.2 billion. For a brief moment, absolute panic flashed behind Richard's eyes. But his bloated ego, and deeply rooted prejudice, immediately took over. There was simply no way in his narrow, elitist mind that a black man in a cheap t-shirt could possess $1 billion cashier's check. It had to be a forgery. It had to be a massive, elaborate fraud. "This is a pathetic fake," Richard shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Did you really think you could walk in here with a printed piece of paper and steal from us?" He crumpled the $1 billion check in his fist and threw it onto the marble floor. And that brings us right back to the explosive moment where our story began. "Get out of my bank, before the stench of your poverty permanently stains my Italian marble floors," Richard screamed, completely losing his professional composure. "Throw this piece of trash out into the street where he belongs." The 2 security guards lunged forward, grabbing Marcus tightly by both arms. They shoved him toward the glass revolving doors with unnecessary force. The wealthy clients watched in silence, some shaking their heads in disgust at Marcus, silently agreeing with the manager's brutal assessment. They pushed Marcus completely out of the building, letting the heavy doors slam shut behind him. He stood alone on the bustling New York sidewalk. The security guards stood inside, laughing and pointing at him through the thick glass. Richard Sterling dusted off his expensive suit, adjusted his silk tie, and turned back to his VIP clients with a charming, apologetic smile. He genuinely believed he had just protected his elite sanctuary from an unwanted pest. He had no idea that he had just signed his own professional death warrant. Marcus stood on the hot concrete of Wall Street. He calmly adjusted his backpack. He did not shout. He did not bang his fists against the thick glass doors. People like Marcus understood a fundamental truth about power. Real power does not need to throw a temper tantrum in a crowded lobby. Real power operates in absolute, terrifying silence. He reached into his worn-out pocket and pulled out his phone. It was not a flashy gold-plated device, just a standard smartphone with a slightly cracked screen protector. He dialed a private number he rarely used. It rang exactly once, before a sharp, hyper-professional voice answered. "Good morning, Mr. Washington. Is there an issue with the Vanguard Trust deposit?" The voice belonged to Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was the senior managing partner at one of the most ruthless corporate law firms in the country. She was the kind of lawyer who made Wall Street executives sweat completely through their expensive tailored shirts. "Eleanor." "Change of plans," Marcus said quietly, watching Richard Sterling laughing through the glass doors. "I am not depositing the check at the Vanguard Heritage Trust branch on Fifth Avenue." There was a brief, calculating pause on the line. "Understood, sir. Where would you like me to route the funds instead?" Marcus smiled. But it was a smile completely devoid of any warmth or forgiveness. I do not want to route the funds anywhere, Eleanor. I want to buy the bank. Specifically, I want a controlling stake in the parent company's regional holding group, and I want the physical deed to the Fifth Avenue branch building. Activate the hostile acquisition protocols we drafted last quarter. Eleanor did not gasp, argue, or ask if he was absolutely sure. She simply started typing rapidly on her mechanical keyboard. They are a publicly traded entity, sir. With your current liquid assets, we can trigger a majority shareholder buyout within the hour if we agree to pay a premium. Pay whatever premium is necessary, Marcus replied. Without a single second of hesitation. And Eleanor? Yes, Mr. Washington? I want the final termination paperwork hand-delivered to the branch manager, Richard Sterling. By me. Consider it done, sir. I am dispatching the legal team now. Marcus hung up the phone and walked calmly across the busy street to a small, rattling coffee cart. He ordered a simple black coffee, handed the tired vendor a $20 bill, and told him to keep the change. He leaned against a cool brick wall, sipping his cheap coffee, just waiting for the massive wheels of corporate destruction to turn. Meanwhile, inside the heavily guarded, marble fortress of Vanguard Heritage Trust, Richard Sterling was having the absolute time of his life. He was practically glowing with toxic self-satisfaction. He walked up to a wealthy regular client, a man wearing a diamond Rolex that cost more than most people's mortgages. I sincerely apologize for that little disturbance earlier, Arthur, Richard said, confidently patting the older man on the shoulder. You know exactly how it is these days. People think just because they walk into a high-end establishment, they are somehow entitled to our exclusive services. Arthur chuckled softly, casually sipping his imported sparkling water. You are absolutely right, Richard. You have to fiercely maintain your standards. If you let one of those street people in, suddenly the whole place smells like a dirty subway station. Richard laughed loudly. A hollow, echoing sound that filled the pristine lobby. He felt like a mighty king successfully defending his glorious castle from the peasants. He walked back to his massive mahogany desk inside his glass-walled corner office. He sat down heavily in his ergonomic Italian leather chair and steepled his fingers, feeling completely untouchable. He was the ultimate gatekeeper of wealth. He alone decided who was worthy of respect, and who was garbage. He casually glanced at the crumpled billion-dollar check sitting at the bottom of his metal wastebasket. He shook his head, genuinely amazed at the audacity of that street thug trying to pull such a ridiculous, poorly planned scam. For the next 45 minutes, everything in the bank was perfectly, beautifully normal. The soft classical music continued to play from the hidden ceiling speakers. The well-dressed tellers continued to flash their perfectly rehearsed, plastic smiles. The air conditioning continued to pump out cedar-scented, freezing air to keep the wealthy clients comfortable, but at exactly 10:15 in the morning, the very first crack appeared in Richard's perfect, arrogant world. Sarah, the young receptionist at the front desk, frowned deeply at her computer monitor. Mr. Sterling? She called out softly over the desktop intercom system. Yes, Sarah, what is it now? Richard answered, sounding highly annoyed by the minor interruption. My terminal just completely froze. It is showing some kind of massive, system-wide network lock. Richard sighed dramatically, slowly standing up from his comfortable desk. It is just a routine IT software update, Sarah. Do I really have to hold your hand through every minor technical glitch in this building? He walked out of his glass office to personally check her frozen screen. But before he could even look at the monitor, a loud, piercing alarm beep echoed through the entire bank. It was not just Sarah's computer that had a problem. Every single monitor, tablet, and digital display in the entire branch had simultaneously turned a glowing, aggressive bright red. The tellers immediately started murmuring to each other in total confusion. The wealthy clients looked up from their expensive phones, clearly annoyed by the sudden, glaring disruption. In the dead center of every red screen was a single, terrifying line of bold text. Emergency asset freeze. Initiated by majority shareholder override. Richard stared blankly at the screen, his heart physically skipping a beat. That was absolutely not a normal IT system error. An emergency asset freeze of that magnitude only happened during a federal government raid, or a catastrophic, hostile corporate takeover. Before his brain could even process what was happening, his personal desk phone began to ring furiously. It was the flashing red line. It was the direct emergency communication line from the global banking headquarters in London. Richard sprinted back into his office and frantically snatched the receiver off the base. "Sterling. Speaking," he answered, desperately trying to keep his trembling voice steady. "Richard. What the absolute hell is happening at your branch?" The furious voice of the global vice president screamed through the speaker. "I do not know, sir, our screen's just completely locked up on us," Richard stammered, feeling a freezing cold sweat break out across his forehead. "Did you reject a massive deposit this morning?" the vice president demanded, his voice literally shaking with pure panic. "Did you physically throw a man named Marcus Washington out of your building?" Richard's stomach violently dropped into his expensive Italian leather shoes. The entire glass office started to spin around him. "I just threw out a violent vagrant who was trying to pass a painfully fake billion-dollar check, sir." Richard aggressively defended himself, his voice pitching much higher than normal. It was obviously a pathetic scam. There was a dead, heavy, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. When the global vice president finally spoke again, he sounded exactly like a man who was helplessly watching his own house burn down to the ground. "You absolute, unforgivable, catastrophic idiot. That cashier's check was personally authenticated by the Federal Reserve yesterday afternoon. Marcus Washington just initiated a hostile takeover of our entire North American banking division. He bought our corporate debt. He bought our private equity. He bought the actual, physical concrete building you are standing in right now. He is the new chairman of the board, and his very first official directive was to permanently freeze every single financial asset tied to your name." Richard could not remember how to breathe. He weakly reached up to loosen his silk tie, suddenly feeling like it was a heavy hangman's noose tightening around his throat. He slowly looked out through the transparent glass walls of his quiet office. The wealthy clients in the lobby were no longer sipping their sparkling water. They were all staring silently at the heavy front entrance doors. Something major was happening outside. 3 matte black Cadillac Escalades pulled up directly onto the curb, outside the bank's heavy glass doors. The wealthy clients in the lobby immediately stopped talking. They simply stared as the heavy doors were pushed open, not by a friendly doorman, but by a very intimidating woman wearing a razor-sharp charcoal suit. This was Eleanor Vance. And she looked like a corporate Grim Reaper walking into a graveyard. Following closely behind her were 4 other high-powered lawyers, all carrying thick leather briefcases, and looking absolutely ruthless. And walking right in the dead center of this very expensive, very powerful entourage, was Marcus Washington. He was still wearing the exact same faded gray t-shirt. He was still wearing the exact same worn-out running shoes. But this time, nobody in the lobby dared to look at him with disgust. The 2 massive security guards who had violently thrown him out earlier instinctively stepped forward to block the entrance, their hands resting nervously on their utility belts. "Excuse me, you cannot be in here," the taller guard stammered, looking extremely intimidated by the lawyers. Eleanor did not even break her stride or change her facial expression. She simply held up a thick manila folder aggressively stamped with a massive federal court seal. "Step aside right now, or you will be unemployed and facing federal assault charges in exactly 3 minutes, Eleanor stated, in a voice that could freeze boiling water. The security guards instantly backed away, pressing their bodies hard against the cold marble walls to let them pass. The entourage walked straight across the completely silent lobby. The wealthy clients, including the older man with the diamond Rolex who had just been laughing with Richard, physically shrank back into their expensive leather chairs, desperately trying not to make eye contact. Marcus did not look at any of them. He walked directly to the transparent glass walls of the branch manager's office, and pushed the heavy wooden door open without bothering to knock. Richard Sterling was still holding his desk phone receiver, his face the sickly color of spoiled milk. He slowly hung up the phone, his hands trembling so violently that he could barely place it on the plastic base. Marcus walked over to the expensive Italian leather guest chair and calmly sat down, crossing his arms. Eleanor stood right next to him and aggressively slammed the thick stack of legal documents onto Richard's pristine mahogany desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the small room. "Richard," Marcus said softly, resting his elbows on his knees and staring directly into the manager's terrified eyes. "I told you that you were violating federal banking regulations. I strongly advised you to do your job and verify the check. But you were way too busy protecting your fragile, elitist ego, to realize who you were actually talking to." Richard swallowed hard, his throat completely dry and tight. He desperately tried to speak, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak came out of his mouth. Mr. Washington, There has been a terrible misunderstanding today. I was strictly following standard security protocols for unverified walk-ins. It was nothing personal." Eleanor let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut right through his pathetic lies. "Save that garbage for the federal investigators, Richard." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at the documents on the desk. "As of 10:15 this morning, Vanguard Heritage Trust is a wholly owned subsidiary of Washington Holdings. Mr. Washington is now the majority shareholder and the acting chairman of the board. Which essentially means, Richard, he is now your absolute boss. And he is your landlord." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression completely devoid of any sympathy or forgiveness. "You didn't just make a simple mistake, Richard. You committed a blatant, documented violation of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. You aggressively denied me service without verification, purely based on my appearance, my race, and your own deeply ingrained prejudice. Because of that massive legal liability you just exposed this entire bank to, your employment here is terminated immediately. With cause." Richard's eyes widened in absolute, soul-crushing horror. With cause? That meant he wasn't just politely fired. It meant his entire multi-million-dollar corporate severance package, his vested stock options, his yearly bonuses. Everything was completely gone. Wiped out in a single, devastating sentence. "Please, Marcus. Mr. Washington." Richard begged, actual pathetic tears welling up in his desperate eyes. "I have a massive mortgage in the Hamptons. I have 3 kids in expensive private schools. You can't just take my entire life away from me over one stupid mistake." Marcus stood up slowly, looking down at the broken man behind the desk. He briefly glanced at the crumpled billion-dollar check still sitting in the metal wastebasket. "It wasn't a mistake, Richard. It was a deliberate choice. You consciously chose to treat another human being like absolute garbage, because you thought you held all the power in this room. Now, you hold absolutely nothing." Marcus turned his head and looked through the open office door. The 2 security guards were standing nervously in the hallway, watching the entire scene unfold. "Gentlemen," Marcus called out, his voice echoing perfectly clear in the silent bank. "Please escort Mr. Sterling off my private property immediately. If he resists even slightly, call the police and have him arrested for criminal trespassing." The karma was so incredibly thick you could cut it with a knife. The exact same heavy-handed guards who had violently dragged Marcus out just 2 hours ago, now walked into the office and grabbed Richard Sterling tightly by his expensive tailored arms. They didn't give him any time to pack his desk. They didn't even let him grab his favorite imported coffee mug. They physically dragged him out of the glass office, forcing him to do the ultimate, humiliating walk of shame across his precious Italian marble floor. Every single VIP client in the lobby watched in stunned, breathless silence. The arrogant man who had acted like an untouchable god of wealth was now being tossed out into the dirty street like a common criminal. And the quiet man in the $5 t-shirt was sitting comfortably behind the biggest, most powerful desk in the entire building. Now, let's step out of the story for a quick moment. What just happened to Richard wasn't just a satisfying moment of poetic justice. It was a direct, brutal consequence of ignoring the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, a strict federal law that actively prohibits credit discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, or age. In the high-stakes, ruthless world of private wealth management, unconscious bias isn't just a terrible moral failure. It is a catastrophic financial liability that will end your career. When you confidently judge a book by its cover, you might just end up getting aggressively bought out by the author. But let me ask you a very real, very uncomfortable question right now. If you were sitting in that freezing cold, luxurious marble lobby this morning, if you were comfortably sipping your sparkling water, watching a quiet man in a faded t-shirt get humiliated and dragged out by aggressive security guards, be completely honest with yourself. Would you have actually stood up and said something? Would you have actively risked your own comfortable status to defend a total stranger against the powerful elite? Or would you have just quietly shaken your head and looked back down at your expensive phone, exactly like the rest of them did? Drop a brutally honest comment below right now. Let's see who actually has the real courage to stand against the elite, and who is just pretending to be brave on the internet, because your silence is exactly how their corrupt system survives. But if you honestly think getting fired and losing a massive pension is the ultimate karma, you are absolutely not ready for case number 002. Imagine a wealthy, highly entitled woman furiously calling the police on a quiet man swimming in his own private luxury pool, completely unaware that he wasn't just a resident. He owned the entire property management company. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for verdict stories right now. You definitely do not want to miss the absolute destruction in our next video.